On this episode of the podcast, I have with me Steffen Harris. He's a corporate vice president, global head of data science and growth analytics, formerly at Microsoft. He is an expert within this field, and I will kind of let him talk a little bit about that. And we're going to be talking about on this episode really core areas that you should be focused on, foundational data issues, really what are some of these long-term issues that have been outstanding, and some of the data debt that's piling up, and how do you actually deal with that if you want to implement some of the latest and greatest, i.e., Gen AI or similar. So we're going to talk to Steffen about that. We're going to talk about the conversation around why some of these long-term things have just not been solved, and what does the story have to look like to move the needle to get some of these things fixed? Steffen, thanks for joining the show.
Thanks for having me, Amir.
All right. Before we dive in, can you give us a quick snapshot of your background?
Sure. Steffen Harris. I've been in the data space for well over 30 years. Most recently, former corporate vice president for Microsoft, equivalent to today's industry term of a chief AI officer. I've served in multiple data executive leadership roles as the chief data officer, for top brands like Wells Fargo, VMware, Facebook, and I also spent almost 20 years in management consulting, and all of that experience has been around the data plane, if you will.
So I guess we're going to be talking about some of the foundational data issues that companies deal with, and obviously, in your role, you probably have seen this in different ways at different companies, but let's talk about some of those long-term foundational data issues. Obviously, this is all in lieu of trying to build on those solid data foundation for advanced stuff that is all out there and everyone's talking about. But talk to us a little bit about some of the core data foundation issues that you see out in the market.
Well, I'll start with, I've been in this space for 30 years now. So I, have seen many different scenarios with respect to data foundation or foundational data. Everything from, how do you master the data to getting common definitions around customer, enterprise customer. How do you actually master product related data? And I will tell you that in everything that I have seen, there's been some really interesting scenarios. I'll talk a little bit about my time at Wells Fargo, right? And helping really instrument an entire end-to-end architecture and ecosystem that allows you to understand both the journey of that customer and providing transparency to the regulators down to the financial instruments. So understanding how you key that data, what attributes from a metadata perspective are necessary in order to be able to understand the journey, the transformations of that data as it moves throughout the various systems and is consumed by its end agents or those who are looking to use that information for business purposes. And, the funny thing that I have come to learn about this space, or maybe not so funny thing, is that when you ask very simple questions like, who owns a customer, right, in an enterprise? Think about, multinational conglomerates who all have a stake in customer data and all have a touch point with customer because the organization has, an enterprise customer that has many geographies, right? They're represented in many geographical locations. You have sales teams that are interacting with those customers in those respective geographies. You have a portfolio of products for which that customer is either consuming or using or leveraging today, or there is opportunity, right, to grow that product footprint with the customer. And so you have all of these channels and not forsaking, depending on your business model. And in many places where I've actually been, Microsoft, VMware, you have an aggressive or a very large partner ecosystem. I think when I was at VMware, we had 77,000 partners in our partner ecosystem. And those partners generated 80% of our revenue, right? So extremely significant portion of our business in terms of how we take our product to market and understanding that product as it exists in the customer's environment. All opportunities for us to double down and understand how our core foundational data, our master data, come together to be able to serve those various audiences. So how does marketing, how does sales, how does finance at the end of the day take full advantage of this? And where are the opportunities where we have the potential for risk to enter into our equation because we have gaps in understanding that customer. When I was at VMware, we, in 1 year, I remember, had 9 sort of healthy acquisitions that took place. And so if you can imagine, we have customers today that are VMware customers. Now it's Broadcom, but you've got a VMware customer and a VMware customer foundation. You now have acquisitions that have come into your ecosystem, and some of those same customers are now also customers of VMware. Integrating all of that data can become an extreme challenge. And in most cases, what enterprises will do is they will take the path of least resistance, right? And so if you're in an enterprise that has not invested in enterprise data management, data governance, putting in the appropriate strategy in terms of, how do we define enterprise customer? How do we master that data? What are the central standards and policies around account curation and understanding, how you attach the appropriate attributes and manage the attribution of that data in a very standardized and consistent way. Those can all surface as challenges when you're trying to configure, price, and quote and provide a quote to a customer. If you are in the midst of a data transformation initiative, one of the major issues for the CFO function are the restatement issue that surfaces, because now all of a sudden your data foundation is providing you insight into sales numbers, right, by quarter. And now your new data foundation is, in production, and when you look at the numbers, when your finance team looks at the numbers, they have a lack of confidence because now you have 2 truths, right? And so that becomes a problem, right? Because which number is the number that I need to trust as a member of finance? And after you've gone through that sort of validation process, and you understand now all of a sudden how you're aggregating that customer, right? Because you've got the acquisitions that have come into play. You've got, the new definitions that have now landed, and you're mastering that data in a way that allows you to have confidence in both the definition, the aggregation, and the financials that follow along with the aggregation of that particular customer or business unit, et cetera. When you sit back and you start looking at the financials, if there is a variance that has now surfaced itself, it creates a tremendous amount of potential rework in terms of restating the financials for a CFO. And that can be problematic. And so understanding the root causes of a lack of having, foundational enterprise data governance and standards, policies, procedures, but also accountable data stewards to manage those definitions across those ecosystems for the data that you master, and ensuring that those systems are also kept current, and providing a scorecard, right? So that you understand the state of the union with respect to the quality of your data, you understand what is being mastered, how it is being mastered, but more importantly, you understand that there are business processes. So at the end of the day, if those business processes do not align with the, current state of the union in terms of mastering that data, you're going to have issues.
This topic really does dovetail into talking about decisions that have been made. So on the engineering side, obviously, they refer back to technical debt. Data people refer to data debt. The classic scenario that almost every data professional has laid out in front of their stakeholders is, let me give you what you want. Here's the short-term win. But Let me tell you about the long term. Let me explain to you why the long term is going to solve these problems long term. But obviously, no one can wait, right? So we got to get this done. And the threat of somebody busting out some independent guru who knows pivot tables and Excel spreadsheets, that's looming in data, right? That doesn't really exist in engineering because you really can't stand up a product with shadow IT. That'd be very hard. You can, but it'd be hard.
It happens. Trust me.
It is harder though. So I think the barrier, you can go get an application to come in, you can actually, but data represents an interesting issue. Now, I know volume has changed, the game has changed, but there's still a component where somebody could go hire somebody and they could start producing something that they need. When you look at that as somebody who has been a data executive for a long time, that short-term win is there because that threat is there, and the long-term win is where we're all trying to get to. But in between, data debt persists, data debt piles up. When you look at this particular situation and you look at companies that have data strategies in place and you see this two-track approach, are we helping ourselves? Are we, as data professionals, are we helping ourselves? Obviously, short-term we might because we want job security, but long-term, are we helping ourselves or is this just the nature of the beast?
If you'd asked me this question 5 years ago, I would say it's the nature of the beast. Maybe even 10 years ago, I would say it's the nature of the beast. I think we've got a very different set of circumstances and opportunity. In fact, in several of my scenarios, I just sort of paused for a minute to sort of imagine or reimagine how can we actually accelerate out of our current set of challenges, look at new opportunity in terms of adoption of AI capability, solve this massive challenge around fixing and recurating our foundational data, but at the same time being very aware and cognizant that at the end of the day, when you look at the top initiatives of any enterprise, they're always going to be around, a focus on the customer and driving revenue, because at the end of the day, you have to satisfy both the regulators as well as your shareholders. And so essentially what I ended up doing was I took the power of AI and ML and I pointed it at the problem. Number one, because I needed to understand and articulate how big is the problem, right? How significant of a lift and investment do we need to make in order to have a complete view of customer in all the different permutations to serve the business, to serve the enterprise. So when marketing goes to do their pull and they want to actually advertise or promote to a customer, right? What are the impacts of being able to serve up that correct data set now with new regulation around GDPR and CCPA, et cetera, and thinking about it in those terms? I took the opportunity to point AI at it to help me understand where do I have incomplete records across the enterprise, and using that as my assessment capability, but also demonstrating the power of how AI and ML can actually serve in identifying those and unlocking those opportunities became a platform for me. And so I leveraged that as the opportunity to advance and to move us forward, but also as a way to articulate to the business. So when talking to the head of sales, right? Listen, if you are anticipating and expecting to grow in this particular product or this particular segment or this particular market, you're going to want to go after, this said customer profile. And if those signals are weak or unknown or unverifiable, you potentially could be wasting time, number one, as you try to chase an opportunity that doesn't exist. But more importantly, you could be in partnership with, marketing, advertising to a customer for which we don't have a flag in our system that allows us to do that because we have not instrumented our foundational data to know whether or not we can advertise and be compliant from a regulatory perspective, right? And so understanding those unique nuances and using the power of the technology with minimal investment to point it at the problem has been the way that I've been able to circumvent and navigate these really challenging scenarios.
And I like the insights because I think that's actually some good advice. When we look at where we're at in the state of data, right? Every company is along their own path of digital transformation. Here comes an idea that exists with Gen AI. I'm going to come back to digital transformation in a second, but Gen AI is the talk the last 24 months. I have no clue what the ROI will be. Sounds great. TBD. We can even shelve that conversation. Executive boards are talking about this. CFOs are hearing about this. People want a direction. They want to know where the roadmap takes us. If you're a data professional and you're sitting in an organization, you darn well know you might have data that isn't ready for prime time. Yeah, you know what you have. And you have the board coming to you telling you, we want the direction. We want to know how this is going to go. When are we going to be able to take advantage of this? We want a competitive advantage. We want to fall behind our competitors. All these things, right, that are all business drivers. They're fair. When you're an executive on the data side and you have these conversations and you're hearing these conversations and you know there's going to be an issue, how do you relate that to the roadmap? Obviously, this represents a potential opportunity in the hands of the right person. But it's quite of a tricky conversation to go, hey, by the way, we've had data quality issues that we've been trying to work on without raising the alarm. As you said, are the numbers accurate? Are they correct? Because obviously then you could bring a whole integrity of the data question into play. Complicated question, but I am curious of your views because this is probably something a lot of data leaders face. And I'm sure in the last 2 years, it's not come up just one time.
Yeah, I think there are a couple things there, as I unpack that. From my own experience, I think the very first thing any data executive or leader should not do is you should not become so locked in your mental model in terms of if we don't solve this problem, then we can't get to the next stage, right? Because that's not an answer that a board is going to want to hear, nor your leadership. Right. And so you really have to get creative in terms of how you think about solving the problem. That's number one. So take a step back, kind of reimagine the opportunity in front of you and frame that opportunity in a way that allows you to really, in parallel, move the needle forward. And so not in all cases are all the data bad in any enterprise, right? And are all the quality of the data bad. In most cases, you have scenarios where that data and the integration of that data and the attribution of the metadata that sit around it may not necessarily produce net positive results, right? And so if you understand those variables, the bigger opportunity and question in front of you is, how do we now take full advantage of this new opportunity to leapfrog into the future? And so if Gen AI and AI at large, and the ability to, take machine learning as an embedded capability to drive and advance our AI agenda is the ask. The number one question is, where's the biggest low-hanging fruit opportunity for us to bundle our expertise, capability, and talent, partner with our product teams, and determine how we can really run experimentation in a rapid way where we know we've got at least directionally correct data. Because here the opportunity lies that if you can actually create those use cases and scenarios in partnership with the business and with your product engineering teams, you can bring marketing along on that journey. You can get sales ramped up because you can create through that series of signals of experimentation some directionally correct focus, right? And so it's a try, fail, and adjust opportunity. And as you're going through that process, be very mindful of the foundational data things that need to be fixed as part of that in order to scale. And you build those instrumented into your roadmap. And so let's not try to fix all of the enterprise before we're ready to go do something to create a win. Let's fix the part of the enterprise that gives us a leapfrog opportunity into that next vertex of, to create value for the business, to grow the business. And when you land that win, then that win comes along with a price tag, right? Because that appetite now all of a sudden has fed the beast, and the beast is going to want more, right? So how do we do more? What's the next opportunity? What are the next products? How do we, reimagine our product ecosystem to serve our customer? And how do we then turn that on and light a fire across multiple channels so that we can see that growth occurring quarter after quarter? And frankly, it's a matter of just getting smart and not taking sort of this SDLC kind of traditional project management approach to fixing things and being very, and this is why data folks understand how to do this, because oftentimes, number one, data lifecycle is not like your traditional application development or SDLC, right? The processes are very different. And so that experimentation is something that is just inherent in the DNA of a data professional. So we're always going to be looking at data sets, how it comes together to form either a data product or to provide insight and or actionable insight, to a consumer. And so my advice is stop, pause, reflect, reimagine the opportunity, and really double down on, a set of use cases that are quick wins that allow you to turn that around, and be very mindful of the fact that AI and ML, without sort of this broader strategic plan and an architecture around it, in and of itself present opportunity for creating a disconnected ecosystem, a choppy customer experience, right? Interruption to your accuracy of your financials. And so at some point, there needs to be that investment around what is the strategic roadmap? How do we then ensure that we've got controls around all of the AI work that's going on across our enterprise so that we are all working towards a common set of outcomes that allow us to move this North Star forward? Because at the end of the day, if you just have everybody kind of doing their own thing, you're going to end up with an ecosystem that is largely disconnected, and that in and of itself makes it that much more harder for you to tell the story of business impact and value.
So I definitely like the fact that what I was hearing is really identify a line of business, a problem to solve. The overall strategy of having a company-wide AI strategy or something similar sounds great, but that's not going to be our starting point. We need to get into the weeds. We need to find something that we can actually build, establish, learn, and then kind of move on to the next thing. You mentioned digital transformation. This is something I'm curious about because for 20 years, we've heard about digital, maybe longer. I don't even know how long now. It's in a long time. The quote, when I hear that we're still on the journey of digital transformation, I'm like, by the time you finish the journey, I think we're going to be on quantum computing pretty much. Like, where is this journey going? And here comes Gen AI, and all of a sudden, people are like, take my money, let's go. And you look at the digital transformation, it took you 15 years to move to the cloud, still automating, but yet we're going to start implementing these advanced technologies that are even more complicated and require even more controls. I want to start maybe understanding, because you deal at the enterprise level quite often. Where does that conversation go? Because obviously what I just heard is, let's not worry, even if we are going through the transformation, let's not worry about whatever that is let's find an area where we can actually implement this, because they aren't on one track. They are parallel. This is not a serial process. So maybe the net of this is we start thinking about enterprise solutions as parallel tracks and not a serial process that maybe a lot of people think.
That's exactly right. It should not be a serial set of processes. They should be operating in parallel, but there should be an overarching programmatic set of governance that sits around it. I'm not saying that you shouldn't have, AI strategy definition in place and a roadmap that's being developed at the same time that you're actually doing, experimentation around a very specific use case, because you essentially are allowing these, multiple things to happen in enterprise, but there's oversight, right? And it's really important because the digital transformation, if we roll back 10 years, it was all about maybe even more than that, maybe 15 or 20 years. It was all about creating commerce, on the web, right? And so that was like, oh, that's our digital transformation. We want to be able to, transact via the web. Well, you move from, transacting via the web to now you've got cloud and hybrid cloud. And so now it's like, well, how and what do we move to the cloud? Well, guess what? Some of the very first use cases that were validated in the cloud were analytics, right? Because those were that was the safest place, to be able to protect certain data, especially when you talk about private cloud. And so now we fast forwarded and we've got multi-cloud as the scenario, right? We want to be able to manage and run workloads in multiple geographies, supporting multiple parts of the business with very different connected and interconnected business processes. And that's all still part of the digital transformation and the journey there. But now we've got another problem that we've got to solve for, and that's the rise of fraud and cyber, right? And so because cyber has now taken front seat in terms of how do we protect the assets of of an enterprise and data that sits around it. That's created this integrated opportunity around cloud, AI, cyber, and at the center of it all is what matters most, and that's the data at its core, right? And all of those things have to ride and be attached to enterprise data governance, foundational data that is also managed, right, across that ecosystem. And that becomes that much more complex, especially in a business that is global, that has, multiple channels and multiple partners that are participating in that ecosystem. Because for every one of those scenarios, you have to make sure that your digital capability serves both the end customer that's interacting with you, the partner that's helping to serve you, every component of your enterprise that is now contributing in some form or fashion, be it sales, service, support, marketing, right? All of those components of your business need to actually be part of that integrated digital strategy. And every time something changes at your edge, right, in terms of new capability, a new interactive AI bot or model, it has opportunity to disrupt that entire digital ecosystem. And that's why it's so important to understand that as you take your use cases and turn them on in production, you fully understand where you need controls and control points and monitoring and alerting so that anytime something is not operating as planned, you understand how to get in front of that.
I guess maybe final question for you, and I'm kind of curious because we've kind of gone through and we've spoken about some of the foundational issues. We've talked about the opportunity, where you should start off with your Gen AI strategy. Obviously, you mentioned low-hanging fruit. We've talked about this journey through digital transformation, and I think you've provided some great insights. When you look at your stakeholders and you look at, let's say, the person with the budget, that could be anybody within the company, whoever's the budget holder, when we're going to them and we need to make sure that the foundation is correct, it's non-sexy, it doesn't help us deliver necessarily faster, right? It might help us deliver better quality and better long-term solutions, but it's not going to help us deliver faster. That story to move that needle has to be very carefully presented because it is an opportunity to take care of things that we haven't had a chance to do. When you're going to and having that conversation with your stakeholders, how is that long-term investment work in their favor? How do you help them understand that this helps them, not just doing their job? And the reason I'm asking is everyone is at will when we work, and there is a delivery pressure on everybody. Your stakeholders have it. As a data executive, you have it. So that long-term sometimes is hard to see because the immediate has to be done because obviously we have to do our jobs.
I think there are a couple things. I think you first have to really understand the problem and how big it is and the relationship of that problem to the expected outcome and the ability to understand how much that problem influences and impacts the stated outcome. And then you need to get really, really clear with your stakeholders, and be super transparent, right? And you guys need to agree, you need to come to an agreement on what it is that we have scoped here and what it is or isn't in terms of managing expectations around outcomes as a result of what we have scoped. Because it's really easy for people to misinterpret what if their expectations are not managed. And so I do think that when you make any sort of commitment that requires an investment in the foundation, you pause to determine, is it the current foundation that I need to go fix? Is it a technology? Is it a business process? Is it a sustainability? Is it all of these things that we need to really incorporate into our long-term plan? And if so, how do we do that in the smartest way to be able to serve the enterprise? Because fixing it all may not necessarily be the answer, right? It maybe 50% of it is where you want to focus, because the top priority of the company is around growth in a particular segment. Okay, well, what segment of that same foundational problem also needs to be fixed, right? And so sometimes you really have to get super smart, if you will, in terms of how you package the problem that needs to be fixed and by what part of the business, right? Because just because it's an enterprise challenge doesn't mean that a partnership in a segment of the business should fix the enterprise's problem, even though they may have contributed to it. But also, at the end of the day, if there is opportunity, weighing the cost of what the impact will be by not fixing it is equally as important as understanding the journey to correct it. And so prioritizing that, those fixes, enhancements, addition of capabilities will impact the outcomes, and they will have a direct impact on speed, quality, impact, and scalability at the end of the day. And so understanding what that profile looks like, creating a clarity around potential risks and how you manage through those risks. And at the end of the day, asserting and fixing on, a business, a set of business outcomes and the impact that those outcomes will have as a result of what you solution are equally as important as understanding, again, how big is the problem and do we need to solve all of it, or do we need to solve, a percentage of it that's directly applicable to what we are trying to deliver?
It's interesting times because I think a lot of things are coming together to deliver these solutions that previously hadn't gone unspoken about. I mean, data governance, data quality, a lot of data management concepts that typically are secondary thoughts because we are very quickly trying to just get the data moved from place to place and then out into some type of form in the stakeholders' hands. So I think it's an interesting conversation. Steffen, if somebody wants to reach out to you to kind of pick your brain on anything you've chatted about, what's a good way of doing that?
I am easily most accessible via LinkedIn. So it's Steffen Harris, and you can find me either Steffin, which is the phonetic spelling of my name, or Stephen Harris, Harris, on LinkedIn, and or drop me an email. Steffen.harris21@me.com. So I still have my me.com from the early days of Apple.
There you go. I love it. We'll make sure we put some of that in the show notes. Again, thanks for being on the show. Thanks for taking the time.
Likewise, it's been a pleasure.
Absolutely. All right, that's it for this episode. We back again, different guest, different topic. Until then, two things. One, we talked a lot about foundational data issues on the episode. We talked about some of those long-term things that haven't been addressed, how you should be talking to them, to your stakeholders, your CFO, how to get some people on board to make sure that we're actually addressing some of these issues so that we can build. And also, Steffen talked about, what do you do when you can't quite roll out an enterprise solution and you have to kind of attack this with lowest hanging fruit first? And I think there were some great insights there. So share this episode with somebody else who's going to benefit from it. I'd appreciate that. Also, subscribe, comment. Let me know how the podcast is going for you. I'd appreciate to hear from you. Until next time, thank you and goodbye.